Hello, I'm Genevieve Tomkins, and I'm going to be delivering this talk on Cairngorms to Coast, which is a little project my husband, David Tomkins, and I came up with last year, hunting for northern damselflies and white-faced darters. So this project sort of started out when David and I moved to somewhere called Laikenbuie, which is 3 miles south of Nairn, up on the Moray coast. We moved there in February 2024. It's a place we'd never been to before. It was an organic farm, so it's overall about 150 acres, and it was an organic farm with a large area left more or less for nature. And more recently, in the last few years, the owners have created a charity to try and protect it into the future. And on the site, over the past sort of 30 years, as they've been on there, the landowners have dug a series of different ponds in different sort of slightly different locations. One of them is quite big and actually is probably more like a lake. And the first thing we sort of thought when we moved there was, blimey, those ponds look good for northern damselfly. But obviously we knew that they're mainly found in the Cairngorms National Park kind of area, and so that was that. And maybe about a month or so later, once everything had stopped being frozen, we had a little dabble in the pond, one of the ponds. So you can see this pond down here. So it's very sedgy around the edges, quite sort of neutral, in not particularly acidic or anything. And found this tiny little damselfly, which looked suspiciously like a northern damselfly, but it's really, really small. So we were sort of thinking, okay, yeah, that's good, but quite like something a little bit less tiny, a little bit more obvious, just to confirm this. Anyway, May rolls round, and yes, we had our first very obvious, newly emerged, sitting on a bit of sedge right by that pond, male northern damselfly here. And then over the next sort of month and a bit, they were just popping up all over the site. And in the end, during that kind of time, late spring, early summer, actually northern damselfly was the most common blue and black damselfly on the site for that time period. They are using not all of the water bodies on the site, but most of them, which is really exciting. And we saw males, females. There's a little female down here. And we also saw breeding pairs, and we had that immature one, and then of course right at the beginning we had that tiny little larva. So it looks like they're breeding across quite a lot of the site. So at this point, what is a northern damselfly? Well, it's one of these blue and black damselflies, Cairngorms. It's endangered on the GB Red List, vulnerable on the European Red List, and it's on the Scottish Biodiversity List. So it's clearly struggling across most of its range globally. To identify it, it's one of these blue blacks. The males and the females have both got the Cairngorms spur, so that's this little bit here sticking out on the side. So if you see it from the side, that's quite helpful, because common blue, which is the other most common one that looks like this up here, doesn't have that. It's not a Cairngorms. We do get azure up here, and actually we did find azure at Laikenbuie as well later on, so that's one you can mix it up with. The males have got this sort of arrow shape on segment 2 here as well, which is really distinctive. And the other thing about them is that not always, but often, you can see on this picture at the top, the bottom half of the eye is often green, which is a little bit of a clue if you see that. Like I said, we also got some females. So the females, they're again very similar to the other Cairngorms females, with this sort of greenish and black thing going on. But you've got to look at the pronotum, and the pronotum on the northern damselflies are kind of shallow V shape. Whereas on azure, which is really the only other one you're likely to have all the way up here, it's a kind of wavy shape at the end, at the bottom of the female's pronotum. And then the larvae, so my face looks like it's in the way here. I wonder if I can get rid of my face. No, I can't. Anyway, so you can see on the larvae that the back of the head's got spots on it, and the tail, which unfortunately I'm covering up mostly there, you can just see it poking out above there, it's very the chordae lamellae or tails on the larvae are really quite distinctively parallel sided and straight and long and thin, and they've also got this hinge about halfway down, so pretty distinctive as well, which is helpful. So that's the northern damselfly. And where is it found? Well, in the UK it's found only up here in the Scottish Highlands, mainly around the Cairngorms, particularly through Strathspey, and there's a patch around Deeside, and then down in a few spots in Perthshire, there's like a clump down there. And then there's these sort of outliers. So you can see we're in blue here at Laikenbuie, and there's a couple of outliers near us, a couple up here. But yeah, just a sort of smattering around, which is what we knew already. So we were quite happy to find this new site for the species up here. And then looking at the north, so this data is all on the NBN Atlas, that's where we got that from. Almost all of that will have come from the British Dragonfly Society's data set, and that's certainly the most reliable data. That and the Highland Biological Recording Group's data, that's very reliable too. And yeah, looking at this data on the NBN sort of got us thinking, okay, what about white-faced darter then? Because that's another species that's endangered on the GB Red List, and we know it's found up in these parts. So they're again pretty distinctive. So it's a dragonfly, so a bit bigger than the northern damselfly, and sits with its wings to the side like this. And the males are this black and red, very distinctive looking things with a white face. You can't see it in that photograph. And then the females are similar to black darter but different, yellow and black. And then again the larvae are pretty distinctive, which is really handy. So they've got these stripes, these three dark stripes on the underside of the larvae and on their abdomen, and you can even see it here. Again, my face is in the way a bit, but the back end of this exuviae, you can see those stripes again, which is really handy because adults are fine, but obviously if we can get evidence of larvae and ideally exuviae, although that's a bit harder with northern damselfly because they get smushed really quickly, especially with all the rain and wind and stuff up here. But yeah, exuviae is definite proof of full successful life cycle. Larvae is pretty good proof, and otherwise adults are good to see too. So yeah, white-faced darter. Well, so we looked that on the NBN Atlas after we'd looked up northern damselfly just to see, and it's more widespread than the northern damselfly. So you can see it's found certainly more towards the west than northern damselfly is. There are some a couple of sites still down in England as well, but I mean they've reduced enormously down in England. And then if we just zoom in on us, again, you can see this sort of clumping going on down in Strathspey, like if you get with lots of invertebrates, because everyone loves going to the Cairngorms. And then this sort of smattering of sites kind of up round us, but quite thin on the ground. So yeah, so looking at this NBN data and looking at where we were and where we'd found northern damselfly, so that's here, yeah. We kind of thought, well, there's this huge gap between us and the Cairngorms for both species. There's a bit more data for white-faced darter, but there's still these big old gaps. And considering both species are considered endangered, and there's a whole bunch of things threatening both of them, but certainly climate change is in the mix. Things like Azu damselfly moving northwards possibly is threatening northern damselfly. Clearly it's going to be really important for both of these species that their sites, where they're at, are well connected, that they're able to move further north if they need to, or move to new sites if they need to. And it would be really useful for us to know more about where they're found outside of the sort of honeypot sites like around the Cairngorms, and also how well connected are all these sites too. So that's kind of where this project developed from. And we decided we'd go and look for them, basically. So what does that involve? Well, the first thing we did is get out the OS maps, and we had a good old look on the OS maps, circling any lochans that looked kind of suitable. We cross-referenced our OS maps with the data on the NBN, so you can see down here there's like a little circle around this lochan, and it says white-faced darter 2014, so there's an NBN bit of data there from 2014, because we wanted to go back and check those sites as well, rather than just only look for new ones, especially things like, 2014, that's over 10 years ago now, so it's quite old data. So that was the first thing, was to look at the OS map, draw on it where we were interested, where we knew there was old data already. Then we cross-reference that with Google Maps, because we started to realise quite quickly that not all of the little ponds, especially ponds within woodland or forestry plantations, some of them have dried up and don't exist anymore. So they're on the OS map, but they're not real anymore. And the Google Maps was quite handy for, not all the time, but for often, for that, to just not, so we didn't waste time. Basically, we could check whether they still existed or not before going out to these sites. So that's what we did. Some of the sites we got in touch with landowners as well, just to tell them what we were doing and get permission to go and have a look. Depended what we were doing, because if we've got right to roam obviously up here, so we were perfectly able to access these sites, and if we're just looking for adults, but it's good, to get in touch with the landowner and get them on board. So we did that where we could as well. And then after we'd identified which lochans we wanted to go and look at, we just tried to fit that into our spare time, basically. So we went whenever we had a free weekend, evening, whatever, we'd go out. And we take a photograph of the site, so we had an idea of what it looked like in the landscape, got the grid reference down, a small description, so, is it sheltered, what kind of habitat is it sitting in, a plant list, which in the summer was more extensive. This is a winter site we visited, so yeah, there's not that many plants to be seen, and my knowledge of sedges isn't good enough to do them on what's left here. And particularly on sites we were interested in for white-faced darter, we were writing, is there rafts of Sphagnum cuspidatum, because white-faced darter really needs that. That's what they live in. And the other reason why we're interested in both these species simultaneously is we know that they sometimes occur in the same pond, so it made sense to look for both. And the other thing we noted down was sort of a very rough percentage of open water to kind of vegetated edge with sedges and stuff, because that's quite important in terms of sphagnum for white-faced darter, and in terms of sedges, quite important for northern damselfly. They're not massively competitive, not really strong flyers necessarily, so you tend to see them on these kind of sedgy edges where they can hide from predators and footle around as adults in between the stems. So we thought we'd write that down, and also write down species we found, which is hidden here by my face, but yeah, we would write down, what species, was it a larvae or an adult, obviously date as well, which I haven't put here, but date was important because some of this, we've been doing this for about, not quite a year yet. So some of the surveys are happening in summer, some in the middle of winter. We're also noting down weather where it's relevant. So when we're doing adult surveys, it's obviously relevant, or if we get to a loch and it's frozen, then, or there's frost on the top, we write that down, because that does affect how easy it is to sample the site. So that's what we do at each site, basically, take all this information, then we obviously do the survey, and we take photographs of all of the larvae, adults, whatever we're recording, so that when we send the records off, Pat Batty can confirm or deny that we're getting these things right. It's just nice to have that confirmation, especially later down the line. I think it's always nice when, who am I? Nobody knows who I am really. To have that photograph connected with the data, so people can sort of trust it better. So that's what we do at each site. We don't time it when we do this, because each site's so different. I mean, they vary hugely in terms of size. It depends whether we're doing a survey looking for adults and larvae, or just larvae, and some of them are sort of quite clear with just sort of sedge edges, and they're quite easy to survey for larvae, whereas these really sphagnum pools are quite difficult. And so it felt like trying to do timed surveys was not really that reflective of anything other than how easy or not it was to it was to survey the site, basically. So we stopped bothering with that and just sort of went with it really is a present absence, although we are counting the number we find. We're spending roughly the same amount of time at each site, but it just depends, or at least surveying at each site. And the other thing we note down as well, actually, which wasn't relevant on this site, but it is on some of them, is whether there's any obvious evidence of fish, because that can impact obviously on particularly northern damselfly, but yeah. So this is the data that we've collected so far. So we've surveyed 38 sites. Just so you know where we are, there's Nairn at the top here on the Moray coast, so Inverness is over here, and then the Cairngorms National Park starts here, so that's that really pale green boundary fluting around the bottom there. And Laikenbuie, where we're based, is this site up here where these bunch of records are. So yeah, we've surveyed 38 sites. 25 of them didn't have northern damselfly or whiteface data in them. We reconfirmed 2 previously known sites for whiteface data, 1 previously known site for both northern damselfly and whiteface data, so both species were still there, which was really good. 3 new sites for whiteface data and 7 new sites for northern damselfly, and that's including the sites we found here at Laikenbuie as well. So that's quite exciting, quite nice to see it mapped out actually as well, because you can see we're starting to really fill in some of the gaps. So there's, yeah, and starting to be able to see how might these populations be mixing, you know, and what kind of stepping stones have we got then starting to develop between Nairn and the Cairngorms National Park. So it's really interesting to actually map this data. We're also sort of spreading sideways slightly as well, because obviously, I mean, we might find that there's pools all the way down these sort of main road here that link them all up, but equally there's, you know, off to the sides there might be pools that link up different populations too. So that's what we're doing. And just to look at the kind of sites we're finding, so this is the same map, Nairn at the top and the Cairngorms National Park just starting way down here. So it's a whole range of things. Like I said, whiteface darter and northern damselfly can be found in the same pools. Whiteface darter tend to prefer more acidic pools with this sphagnum cuspidatum kind of raft in it. Whereas northern damselfly can also be found in pools like this one, which is where we found it at Laikenbuie. So quite a neutral site, no sphagnum there or anything. Quite different to say this site underneath it, which was one of the new whiteface darter sites, which is a very acidic, very sphagnum-rich, quite small bog pool within a forestry plantation. This one was actually one of those, that's what it looked like, right next to the road, one of those sort of fire safety pits that get dug or were dug in the past. So really different sites, those two. And then this site over here is another one of the northern damselfly sites, not that far away as the crow flies from the Laikenbuie ones, but quite different. So these sites up here tend to be sort of situated within farmland, and both of these are situated in what you could broadly call farmland. There's sheep grazing by this pool here some of the time, and you can see there's like a fence running through it and stuff. But this is quite a lot more acidic, a lot of cotton grass in there, and just not really acidic, not super sphagnum-y like the forest pool, but you know, getting that way. So, and then down here you can see this is another one of these whiteface darter sites. This is a reconfirmed one, and this was not in forestry or in a farmland context. This was up on a sort of bit of moorland, quite boggy moorland, and so there's a whole range of different habitats actually that we end up looking at. I mean, you can see even looking at this map in the background here, you've got these forestry blocks, where a lot of these whiteface darter sites seem to be cropping up. You've got this kind of open, the kind of grey stuff is the sort of farmland, broadly speaking, which starts transitioning down to moorland and then gets really sort of moorland kind of shooting estatey as you get further down. So it's quite a real range of habitat. And I mean, one of the other reasons why we wanted to do this is because the Cairngorms gets all the attention, and obviously, understandably, you know, if people want to see stuff, they go there to see it because that's where you know you're going to find it. But it's really interesting and important for us to know where these species are found outside of the context of the Cairngorms. And you've got such a broad spectrum from the Cairngorms up to the Moray coast through this area. You can really explore that quite nicely. And the other thing is, Nairn is sort of, I think, seen as a very kind of productive landscape. A lot of it's been turned over to various farming, lots of sheep grazing, arable, or forestry plantation. But actually, tucked away in there, there's some really, really nice and quite special relics of habitat that we've come up with in a few different places. And it would be nice for Nairnshire to get a bit more attention, the attention it deserves. And also, and you know, when we're talking about all these species that are endangered and all this habitat loss and problems with climate and things needing to be able to move around, and we can't keep putting all our knowledge and eggs in the Cairngorms / Glen Affric sort of basket, really. And we need to start moving further into these other areas and really starting to look at how they can support wildlife too. So, like I said before, it's quite a wide range of habitats that we're doing these surveys in. You know, you've got fairly neutral ponds in fields, and then you've got acidic bogs and woodlands and stuff. So that has a big impact on the surveying. And again, like I said before, that's why we don't time it, because it's just so varied. So you've got a white-faced darter larvae here sitting in a typical place on a bit of sphagnum in a pool, and I mean that stuff's really difficult to survey for larvae without just getting out massive clumps of sphagnum that you need to wade through. So for the easier pools, you can't quite see me down here, but I've got a net, a sort of normal kind of pond dipping net. So for the easier pools, that's perfectly adequate, and we tip it into, we've got this big A3 white sorting tray, and tip it into there and sort through and have a look. You can see Dave here, this is one of the summer sites, so he's looking for adults, and he's got an adult catching net. We're both quite experienced with catching and handling adults, so that's fine. And that's really helpful. I mean, the other thing is the camera. So for example, on this site, it's such a big site and really quite difficult to get around on because you can't really see here, but it's super wet, great big overwhelmingly high puddles everywhere. So chasing after dragonflies is actually quite hard. So we did actually see an adult male white-faced darter on this site, but the only way we managed to really see that it's definitely what it was taking a picture of it and zooming in, because it was quite far away, and you know, luckily it's a very distinctive species. So yeah, adult net and camera. And then for these pools here where it's white-faced darter and this real sphagnum-y stuff, we tried all sorts of things. We've tried the kind of usual kitchen sieve method. That wasn't really working great either. Anyway, the thing we're finding working best at the moment, and Dave came up with this, was the big A3 sorting tray, just plunging it in and pulling it up again. And the sort of plunging motion that seems to draw stuff, it suck things in, and because it's A3, you've got quite a bit of space in there. It seems to suck things in. You don't get all the silt being woofed up, so it's not all dark and hard to see what's going on. And you don't tend to get great clumps of sphagnum like you do with the net. So that seems to be working quite well, and we sort of got 5 white-faced darter out of one of the pools doing this method. So we'll probably carry on using that method. But yeah, whole range of things. So what's next then? Well, we're going to carry on basically. So you can see this is a map showing the NBN data for white-faced darter in green and for northern damselfly in blue, and then you've got our data up here. So you can see there's still this huge gap between what we've found so far and the Cairngorms records. The boundary is a bit further up, but the first records are down here. So we want to fill this gap in, or see if we can fill this gap in, at least look and see if they're in there, both species. Because I think that would be really interesting to know, really helpful to know whether these populations are isolated or not. Can stuff move between them? I mean, that's got a lot as well, you know, related to sort of genetics and how genetically isolated are some of these sites as well. So there's a lot of useful information there. There's also, you can see so there's a couple up in Colburn Forest. There's a white-faced darter and a northern damselfly record up here. There's this northern damselfly record over here. So there's a few existing records as well that we'd quite like to go and check, and we want to stretch up all the way up to the coast here. And then after we've sort of linked all that up, we might spread sideways into some of these areas, maybe have a little look up here, because this seems interesting up here, especially for northern damselfly. But basically, once we've done the main bulk of it, which is this sort of Cairngorms to coast idea, we're going to write up the data. So all the data is going to go in via the iRecord, There's the special data inputting thing the British Dragonfly Society's got there, and Pat can check we're not getting anything wrong. But we're also going to write up this survey and include all the extra information. So include all the information on habitat type, whether there's fish there, other things that we're finding there, all of that stuff. And also include information on whether we think management would be helpful at that site. So for example, this is a woodland acidic bog pool. That was one of the new sites for whiteface data, and you can see there's quite a lot of Scots pine starting to creep in there. So it might be helpful, for example, at this site to just go in with a little volunteer group and just pull those saplings out to stop the site drying up. Some of these sites you can see where they've sort of got smaller and smaller with this sort of encroachment by trees. And some of the sites as well have got quite obvious drains in them, so it could be quite useful on those to block those drains up. Which is partly why getting in touch with the landowners is helpful beforehand. So yes, we're going to write it all up. So that's it really. Thank you for listening. I hope that wasn't too rambling. It's just a really fun project, and I think it could be really useful to have this data to know how they're doing outside of honeypot sites like the Cairngorms, to see whether they're actually connected to those sites down in the Cairngorms or not, and to start doing a bit of work further afield. Some of these sites outside of the Cairngorms area, because Cairngorms gets an awful lot of pressure from, you know, disturbance by dogs and visitors, because it's such an attractive place to go. There's a lot of housing pressure in the area, so that, you know, there's been a northern damselfly site lost quite a while now, like 10 years ago, wasn't there, down in Aviemore, because Tesco's got built there. So we can't keep putting all our eggs and knowledge in that one basket. We need to really start looking at these other places. I'd say the other thing as well is I think it's nice, I think, to start getting people used to the idea that, you know, it's important to have high nature value sites outside of places like the Cairngorms, which are known to be for that, you know, have areas specifically for that. But why not in Nairnshire? We need to start protecting these important habitats in places like Nairnshire, where they're actually probably completely under the radar and therefore much more likely to be suddenly drained or ploughed up for trees or whatever, when they've got all these rare species on them. So yeah, thank you for listening.